The decision by Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, to call for a fresh vote on Scottish independence has already upset Prime Minister Theresa May's timetable for triggering Article 50, the process for Britain to exit the EU. So how seriously will Scottish independence now affect Brexit? Joining me to discuss this is Janan Ganesh, the FT's UK political commentator. Janan, this wasn't totally unexpected, but it did come as a bit of a surprise in the precise timing of the announcement from Sturgeon. How much do you think, looking beyond the immediate effect, which was the Prime Minister had to sort of postpone plans to trigger Article 50 now to the end of March, but how much do you think it will really affect the whole process of Brexit?
A pretty substantial effect, I think. At the very least, Nicola Sturgeon now has leverage over Theresa May when it comes to the negotiations to leave the EU. And that's because the harder the exit is, the more Britain departs from the single market, customs union, maybe even goes out on WTO terms, the more provocative I think that will be to Scottish public opinion, which was overwhelmingly pro-EU. And so Nicola Sturgeon can say to Theresa May, actually, over the next 2 years, you have to look upon me as almost an unofficial veto on your negotiating strategy. And the reason that's so problematic is that everything Theresa May has said in the 9 months that she's been Prime Minister has been quite tough in terms of the model of Brexit that she would ideally like. So she might have to soften her line because of Nicola Sturgeon's influence.
Do you think she'll soften her line?
I can't see how she can soften it substantially without losing the other half of the equation, which is her own party and Eurosceptic opinion in England. I mean, there's a lot of that in Scotland as well. But in particular in England, if Eurosceptics who voted to leave on the assumption we would be out of everything, have total control of free movement, the freedom to do international trade deals, if those people see a deal which is much more moderate than that, and they attribute it to Theresa May taking into account the views of a leader of a nation of 5 million people, I think there'll be a lot of political flack for the Prime Minister. And so she's caught between two impossible demands. She has to choose who to disappoint. I can't actually predict who she will disappoint in the end, except to say that turning your back on the union or making a decision that helps to unwind the union would be absolutely historic.
But you could also make the case, I mean, many people remarked how they were surprised. Theresa May, a Remainer, perhaps reluctant just on that side, that she seemed to go so quickly for a hard Brexit once she became Prime Minister, and people have accused her of being being held captive, if you like, by the hard right of the Tory party. This gives her an opportunity, doesn't it, maybe to tack back a bit to where she instinctively feels a bit more comfortable, and she can say, look, it's the union, as you've said, or, and that means you're going to have to take some, reduce your demands on the other side, or it's bust.
The problem with that is that it assumes that her sincere underlying belief is that Britain should have a much softer exit, and she's only being dragged rightwards by her own party. I wonder whether actually her own instincts are a lot more Eurosceptic, a lot more in favour of a hard exit than we've ever really been willing to entertain. She was pro-Remain during the campaign, but in the most perfunctory, nominal way possible. Made very little effort to campaign for that position. She has a sort of home counties Anglican view, which is that it's worth trading away a bit of economic dynamism for a bit more control over immigration, to have a bit more social cohesion. That means I'd have no trouble believing at all that she herself thinks the hardest of exits is acceptable to her. And therefore, even if were she to be able to be liberated from the pressure from the right of her own party, she'd end up in the same place. That's just where her instincts are.
Well, now let's just look at the other side. I talked about Theresa May, Nicola Sturgeon. Do you think, this is a high risk for her, isn't it, in terms of going, almost under pressure almost of events, of having to push for another referendum. Some people think it's too early. Do you think, what's her calculus? Do you think she feels she can win this one?
If she doesn't win it, then I can't see another referendum on independence for a generation, but an actual generation this time, not the way she used the word generation after losing the last referendum. It would be dead for a long time. It would end her career. There's no reason to assume that she would win it because the polls are fairly ambiguous at the moment. So her calculation is that she can ask for a referendum, and even if she doesn't get it, she's better off because It's the spectacle of a British Prime Minister from London saying, no, you can't have a referendum, which is an obvious grievance with which the SNP can stoke their own voters. And in the short to medium term, it allows them to influence the negotiating strategy of the UK vis-a-vis the EU, because if they bring back too bad a deal, then a referendum would be winnable for the Scottish nationalists. So I think she's although there is a risk that she calls a referendum and loses, there are many more opportunities in this. So I think she's played a bit of a blinder, actually.
Right. Janan, Ganesh, thank you very much.
Thank you.